debating, interviewing. You know that's what they doing. Stick around. It's about to get all Ruby up in here. Remote Ruby starts now.
Well, hello, my guests. It's just me hosting this week, but one of you can impersonate Jason Charnes and one of you can impersonate Andrew Mason if you would like. And I apologize for my voice. I almost lost my voice Tuesday at RailsConf last week at the bar at the Speakers and Scholars and Guides dinner. Luckily, I gave my conference talk before then. Otherwise, that would have made for a rough time giving a talk. But Collin and Kent are here with me, or rather fake Jason and fake Andrew. But yeah, I just wanted to go through our RailsConf experience because I thought it was personally one of my favorite RailsConfs that I've ever been to. Maybe my favorite. I'm not sure. It's hard to remember some of them now that they've been so many years ago. But yeah, how was it?
It was solidly in my top two, that's for sure. Looked into two, but it was the best. It was great. A lot of fun. Met a lot of great people.
What year was the other one and where was that one?
That was last year in Atlanta.
Yeah. I think this one topped that for sure.
Oh, yeah, I would agree too. Yeah, definitely my favorite RailsConf, unquestionably.
And sadly, the conference started out with an announcement of this will be the second to last RailsConf, which was, I'm sure people on Twitter and stuff have seen the news. But basically, they're shifting focus on RubyConf and supporting all the regional conferences, which I think is a great move. Just to, support and change things up after, I don't know how many years. The first RailsConf was 2006 or something, 2005. I forget who. Andre Arco mentioned being at that first one. That was a long time ago. So, Collin, favorite talks?
Ooh, let's see. Hillary Strauss, I can't remember her full name, but she gave a talk about accessibility as a backend developer. It actually wasn't what I expected, but it actually turned out to be really good.
What was the high level gist of it?
Yeah, it's more about making your code accessible so that when other people on your team look at it, it's easier for them to navigate and much more readable and that sort of stuff. I found that one really interesting because I was thinking here's how to get started with accessibility as a backend engineer, or primarily working in the front end or something, but it was not that.
That's what I thought you were going to say. It was
right.
The ARIA attributes that
right.
I don't ever remember. And
Right. So it was a surprise for me when I got in there to see what she was talking about, but it was really great. That's one I would recommend folks to check out when the recordings come out.
My two favorite, although I guess I'm a little bit biased, but were the talks by you two guys. I recommend it very much. But seriously, they were great. The two quirky ones I think people should check out was the D&D character sheet one, where Joelle actually did the D&D voices, which I thought was quite funny. And Cody Norman had a fun talk in Action Mailbox with a surprise I'm not going to ruin, but at the end, there's a nice little surprise that was quite fun. Brought the room to a roar.
Yeah. There was a couple
definitely
really good ones.
Yeah. Cody, everyone should check that one out when it comes out too.
The end of his got a very good reception. Yeah, it's hard not to want to spoil it. And for any context, his is on Action Mailbox. So sending emails to do things that you would not think of doing.
He might do a blooper reel of all the things he thought about that didn't quite work, all the weird ideas.
So he told me about a couple of them. I didn't hear about the blooper reel though, but he should totally do that. That would be awesome.
Agreed. I was chatting with him about his talk before RailsConf. There is one that I will spoil that uses lob.com's print and send a postcard API thing. I think he's sent a postcard or whatever, but not in time to have on stage with him. But I'm hoping that next time he gives that talk that you will have a physical postcard that arrived via email. What else? I don't know. We had a great time just hanging out, chatting with way too many people, meeting so many people. It was wild, as usual. But this was my first time doing the Scholars and Guides program. Collin, this is your second?
Third.
Oh, third time?
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah, this is my third time because first I had Roman Turner.
Yeah.
Then I had Dominic, and then I had Adam this time. So typically you get paired up So as a scholar, you apply. At least in my experience, most of the people that they accept into that it's like their first conference that they've gone to. And then they pair you up with someone who is more seasoned and go into conferences to try and give you the best experience possible and get as much as you can out of it, both finding the right talks that fit your goals for it and introducing you around and making some new friends. As a scholar, you get your ticket covered to the conference. And I actually didn't know this. I don't know if they've done this in the past. I've never asked or heard about it, but I believe they also covered the lodging for the scholars as well.
Oh, wow. That's very generous, because that's oftentimes those are people who are, their company is not sending them or whatever. So they're coming out of pocket for it. So it makes a lot of sense, because like as a guide, I would also more or less happily do that just to welcome someone to the community so they have a very memorable, not super awkward first time at a conference.
The other thing too, I don't know if they've done this in the past either, but to me, at least as far as I remember, this was like the first one where they had them do a project at the end of that of some sort. They might have done that last year, but I don't remember fully.
I kind of remember last year seeing a lot of the scholars doing lightning talks. So I kind of assumed that they were kind of encouraged to do that. And that was basically the same thing this year. But you didn't have to do a lightning talk. You could record like a YouTube video or write a blog post or do something.
Yeah, I think you could even like build a little app based off of maybe like something you learned in a talk or something like that too.
That's cool.
But both of ours ended up doing lightning talks and they were awesome.
They were phenomenal. Erica got massive applause. She was my scholar. And I think an important thing to point out is like the scholars, it's just their first time at a conference. They're not necessarily a junior, even though that is kind of like a lot of people who are in college learning programming or something make sense to be scholars, but you don't have to be. Like I think Erica's a senior at her job or whatever. So the lightning talks are a great way to get them into really deeply into the community, because they have to get up on stage and speak if they do that, which it seemed like most of the scholars did. I don't know if any of the other ones had done the other projects, but Erica practiced hers a whole bunch and nailed it. Did you and Adam do a bunch of prep going through the slides and any last minute changes or anything like that?
Yeah, we set aside time the first 2 days to get our bearings about it, see where he's at in slides, me giving him feedback and trying to help him work through, like, I kind of want, like, there's something I want to do here, but I'm not really sure what kind of thing. And then, we ran through it twice, I think, in full to like get a time check and work out the flow and delivery on things. We didn't really put like that much into that aspect of it, but when it came down to do it, I knew like the second time we ran through it, when he like got to like the second or third slide, I was like, he's on pace now and he's just delivering amazingly. I knew he was going to kill it right then and there. And sure enough, he did.
He sure did. The laughs that he got out of the room were so great.
Totally. Yep.
Yeah, that was the fun thing. Because like if you've never given a talk, you got 5 minutes. You don't really know how many slides you're going to need and all that. And also the delivery that you do at home versus nervous on stage or right before. Erica practiced hers in the little green room 2 or 3 times right before. And like the first time was just at 4 or something. And it was like she was nervous. She was going through it quicker than she might normally. And then she took a breath. I gave her a joke to put in there at the beginning and then filled it out to 5 minutes just perfect. Because you will get the gong. Drew Bragg is waiting to ring the gong, like waiting for it.
I feel like he wants nothing more than to ring that gong, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't see any that he got to actually do the gong on. Did you?
I did not, because I only saw the first half. But
Same.
I think he said one person maybe got the gong. There was a bunch of people who were like real close. And he was like, I almost got you. But they killed it, did an excellent job. Erica's talk was, I recorded it for her because they were not recorded this year, unfortunately. So I got up my phone, but like she was actually giving a talk about stuff she did at her job for the decay of the most recently viewed pages and stuff. And I know that there were several people who were like, oh, that's how I can like use Ahoy events and stuff. I always wondered how to do that and make use of it. So it was just super cool to see that. First timers afraid to get up on stage. Now we can convince them to submit a full talk to RubyConf or something eventually.
I can't imagine having to go first too and all that. First time giving a lightning talk and you're the first one to go. That sounds super nerve-wracking.
She signed up for that. She did that on purpose so she would get out of the way. Because we were both the first day, and it was nice to just, instead of all 3 days just kind of having this anxiety the whole time about your upcoming talk, it was much easier to give the talk the first day. I also told Erica, you'll be first, so you will have given the best and the worst talk so far.
Right.
I made the mistake of I didn't practice my talk Tuesday morning, and I probably hadn't practiced since Friday. So up on stage, I was a little flustered on a couple of them because I'd started talking about what was on the slide, but forgot I had put the animation to slide an arrow into what I was talking about. And then I was like, crap, we'll just skip that and whatever, move on to the next slide.
I think I did that too. I had arrows in there and I'd be trying to transition to the next slide, and then slow arrow comes over like, all right, that thing important. Moving on.
Let's see. Nadia's keynote was awesome. I missed Irina's on Tuesday, but I heard that was amazing.
Awesome. Yep.
That was the one that the FlexCar team was mentioned in, right?
Yep. So they were moving, I think it was from 70 microservices over to a straight Rails monolith. Yeah, in Java over to a Rails monolith. And they were doing it like that night. Actually, I take that back. They might have been doing it Wednesday night, Tuesday night. I think it was the night before her keynote. And it went apparently really well. I think they had like a couple small issues, but they got through it rather quickly. Because I remember I was hanging out with Freedom in the lobby bar Tuesday night, and we were talking about that. And he was like, yeah, we're doing it tonight. And I was like, oh, man, okay, that's exciting. And also nerve-wracking too. But it seemed like things went really well, which is awesome. Awesome to see that like they're choosing to do that.
Yeah. When we were chatting at the bar, he was talking about his, I don't remember, like project manager team kind of planning out future updates and stuff. And he was like, normally they're planning things one by one. And then he's like, no, we can actually do like 4 of these at a time now. They're like, what do you mean? That doesn't make any sense. Like, don't you have to completely finish the first project before you can start on the second one? And he's like, no, we can just kind of do these in parallel and do like 4 of them at the same time. And it was like, I can't imagine how much better the product flow is when they've got things they need to change and a giant app of 70 microservices, getting those in sync, making the changes across them, deploying that, and all that overhead has to be a nightmare. And then being able to just move to Rails and then more or less have everything significantly simpler. I'm sure that is life-changing kind of stuff.
Yeah. I know Freedom said he was going to work on a blog post for that to kind of go a little bit more in depth into their process, but hopefully that opens the eyes of other companies who are like, oh, we can dig ourselves out of this hole too. And
seriously.
We can do it with Rails.
Yeah. It's stories like that are what the community needs to hear more of. Nadia's keynote was talking about building an app from the ground up in Rails. And then all of a sudden you have very few users. And then all of a sudden you scale up to like 1 million users very quickly. And it's like Rails makes that possible because I'm just trying to keep things live and add features and just do all that. But I can't be stuck in the weeds the whole time. Otherwise, it can't serve the 1 million users and they'll go somewhere else. Her talk always does that for me. Just kind of blows my mind of like, wow, that was such a great time and a place to be. And then all of a sudden you've replaced Goodreads and that's right time, right place, right people, and right technology.
She was super nice too. I got to sit down with her at lunch.
Nice.
I told her, of course, like the keynote was amazing and super inspiring, but then we just got to hang out and talk and get to know each other a little bit. Super nice. She was super encouraging. giving me some confidence because I was speaking shortly after lunch then. So she was boosting me, which I appreciated. Daniel Colson was there too, hanging out with us, and very much the same from him as well. Thanks to both of y'all for that.
That's the thing of it that I was telling Erica when she was nervous about her lightning talk was like, we're all here to support each other. Nobody's sitting in the audience waiting for you to fail and excited that you fail. It's like, no, they're also supportive. Anybody that had technical issues or anything at all, stumbled on something during a talk, like everybody's just patient, happy that you're here giving a talk and we can all hang out and do this.
One exception, though, maybe Drew with his gong. But other than that, yes.
Wow.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Drew is the exception.
Yeah.
I'm curious too about the performance tool that John Hawthorne gave as the second day keynote. What was it called?
Bernier, I think.
Yeah.
Bernier. Yeah, that's right. Looks awesome. We have small applications that don't have tons of performance needs, but GitHub and Shopify and so many companies do. And it's great to have better tooling to measure and see what's going on in your app. Because I might write some threading code or something, but it's like I try to imagine what's going on with the interpreter lock and all of that stuff, but I don't actually know.
Sure.
And so it's like a great tool to actually dig into all those weeds and see like what is actually happening, which thread is running and jumping between those, and one's doing IO and all that. And it's like stuff we use every single day, like Puma, being able to see what is Puma doing and then how is Rails working inside of that. You can actually see all those details with that tool, which is cool, but we don't do a ton of that. Hopefully we will get into more of that at some point when we want to go optimize things. But for the most part, ours is just kind of making sure that our database queries and our views and stuff are rendering efficiently and not making extra queries when it's not necessary or using caching properly and whatnot. But more tools like that for the greater community, or make Rails like more, or Ruby in general, like more adoptable. Like Freedom can confidently move from Java to Rails and then also have the performance tools to like debug when they run into some performance thing. Because the other thing I was talking to him about, which is really interesting, is you've got a team of Java engineers now writing Ruby. And you know what they're going to write? They're going to write Ruby code that reads and acts like just Java. Like Java, which is not what you want. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they migrate and take advantage of the Rubyisms and stuff. And I forget who I was telling this, but it was like Rails is kind of the best example of taking advantage of all of the flexibility that Ruby gives you, making your own language for writing web applications pretty much. That is such a wild, flexible thing that, and maybe I was talking to him about that, where it's like Rails is such a great, it's like Play-Doh, you know, like Ruby is the Play-Doh, and it's like, okay, we'll go make this thing out of it and we can just mash it into what we need or whatever. And that's what's cool about Ruby and being able to choose Rails. Did you guys go to any of the workshops on Wednesday?
I did not. Unfortunately, I had all intention of going to Andy's workshop, but I was dead tired that day.
Andy's was
the Postgres workshop.
Build high performance active record apps. Andrew Atkinson. And at the same time was Let's Extend Rails with a Gem, Noel Rappin's talk, which is kind of a very great complimentary thing, because I guess we talked in the lunch line briefly that his workshop and my talk didn't really overlap a ton, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Because, man, Rails plugins are kind of a massive thing, because really your Rails app is a plugin. So there's a million different things you could do with it. And what else was there? Vision for Inclusion workshop.
Markheim was there with his SQLite workshop.
Yep. Which I really wanted to see. They were recorded this year.
They were.
Yep. And Jason Sweat did a TDD for Absolute Beginners workshop.
Yeah, which I know my scholar, Adam Labarge, went to that. He wanted to do a workshop, and I was like, well, out of everything that's out there, that one's probably a great one for you. He's maybe 6 months in-ish to learning Rails. I think maybe even a little less. So I figured that'd be a good one. Probably didn't
Yeah.
need, no offense, Andy, but he probably didn't need the high performance Postgres one. Probably the TDD for beginners one's better choice.
Yeah, it looks like Vladimir did From Slow to Go Rails test profiling hands-on at that same time too. No, I'm sure it was good too. You guys do any hack day stuff?
We chatted with some folks. I tinkered around with a silly little side project of mine briefly, and I tried to walk some people through it, but it was like not a lot of time to do it. So
Yeah.
And that was, again, like I was already like super dead tired. Not much sleep the 2 days before. So just like really dragging that day, but pushed through.
I got to bed at a reasonable time the first 2 nights, I think it was. Then the last 2 nights was 3 a.m. both times.
Yeah.
And then up at 7. So
Yep. Then Monday I went to bed at like 10, 11 at the latest. And then after that it was like 1:30 and then 3.
yeah, it happens.
It happens.
You can
That's right.
sleep when you're home.
Until now, observability was metrics, logs, and traces. It was reliability budgets, error rates, and latencies. It was big acronyms on a central dashboard. In short, it was what the ops team cared about, not the developers. But Honeybadger is changing that. Of course, you need the big picture, the single pane of glass that lets you know what your system is doing and that it's operating normally. But individual users matter too. User experience is more than just a line on a dashboard. Honeybadger's observability platform lets you drill down into the details, into the individual user experiences that drive product development and your business forward. It helps you understand your product and your users as much as it does your systems and performance. Honeybadger's free developer plan includes error tracking, uptime monitoring, custom charts and dashboards, and 50 megabytes per day of structured event logging. To get started, visit honeybadger.io. That's www.honeybadger.io.
You had a pretty full table on Hack Day. How'd that go?
Not as good as I wanted it to. So the hack day slots were like 2 hours long. So you really need like a very tiny project, which is the hard part about it. I had mostly big projects. The one we got documentation fixed on one place and noticed. We got dev container for one of the gems. I can't remember which one, but the rest of it was like, I wanted somebody to like set up the lemon squeezy pull request and review it with me, which would be a great project to do. But getting all of that set up and everything was kind of a pain, which actually was kind of what led into like, we definitely need dev containers for developing gems. It makes sense to have a container for your Rails app because spinning up your whatever databases and Ruby version and all of that can nicely run inside of a container. You don't have to install anything locally. But developing a gem is even worse. So like the PayGem or Madman or whatever it might be, if they've got to be compatible with SQLite and they've got to be compatible with MySQL, Postgres, 4 different Rails versions, 4 different Ruby versions, it's much worse to do that locally. So really the dev containers are probably even more valuable there. So the other thing I wanted to do was kind of go through the pull requests I'm trying to finish up for Rails, which is adding the same dev container and CI stuff that the Rails applications now have into the Rails plugin new generator, and then modifying those as necessary for the gems. So I don't know if we'll include any examples of like the matrix of Ruby and Rails versions, because Rails itself doesn't really have a way to set up the multiple gem files to test against versions of Rails. You can do that with Bundler yourself, but it's a little bit of a pain. So the appraisal gem is what I've been using. And I think Thoughtbot was there working on appraisal and some other gems during the hack day. But yeah, there's all those little weeds of like, you make a pull request to Rails and what exactly should it do? And it's like, someone's got to maintain this. So you're not on the Rails core team. So making sure that someone, like in this case, it would be Raphael, making sure that you're in line with what Raphael wants for that feature is really kind of the most important thing. So I'm going to get sort of the basics going, and it might be more of a work in progress because there are just lots of those little, do we test it against 4 versions of Ruby? Does it even matter? Because the Ruby has been so backwards compatible for a while that it's really not a big deal. So I think it might even just be like one version of Ruby. But if you do that and your CI says, well, your Rails application will come with a .ruby version file, your gem does not. So then what do we put in the CI?
Sure.
Do we also
Sure.
copy over the .ruby version file? But does that make sense? Because if we did that, then your version manager local is only going to have one Ruby version. And then that will conflict when you're like making your pull requests and stuff. So it is like every feature you add to Rails, it's like, well, sounds easy. I could do that in an hour. And then 4 hours later, you're like, I really need someone's advice on how best to handle this. And that was kind of like the point of the hack day. If you've never done these kinds of things, the hack day is excellent for that, where it's like, hey, we have an idea. We'd like to contribute to a library. What are all the extra considerations that I don't think of because I'm so focused on my use case? I think that's the common thing of somebody going from here to like writing a Rails app to writing a Rails plugin. It's like now we have to think about every other little decision along the way. So I think the hack day is really interesting for that stuff. It's just being more prepared on my part would probably have made it a lot more successful for people. But we did get a couple PRs in.
Yeah, so small projects. Also, just the idea that you can walk
Yes.
up and speak to people. Like
Yeah.
One's like, oh, hey, you make that gem. I love it. Thanks.
Yeah.
If you want to, you can just say hello. But so,
Yep. Yeah.
Well,
Just talk about it or share your story of using the gem with the author right there. Super cool.
You can get some nice
So,
people through all the issues. So like, thank God, not another issue.
Yeah.
Saying nice things.
It's a great way to interact with your users that you never normally talk to unless it's a problem. There's no testimonials tab on your GitHub repository, but
Here.
there is issues and discussions, which are basically also issues. That's what we need. Testimonials tab.
Kudos to.
I guess I also missed Aaron's final keynote.
Did you?
I knew it was recorded, so I ended up chatting with people outside.
I didn't actually do much hallway tracking, even though like I would in between talks, I'd talk with folks. I don't think I skipped any talks to hallway track. How was the hallway track? Did you do much of it?
I didn't go to like any talks. I went to Cody's talk in the Norman block.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, it was great. This time there was a really good, so there was 2 levels. The top level was the lunchroom and the keynote room or breakfast. But then you spent all of your time on the lower level, which was where all the talks were, but also like a nice funnel. Everybody comes out of their talks, runs into each other, and then can walk out either into the sponsors area or back into another talk. So the layout of this was awesome. I thought it worked really well. It didn't feel too big. I heard about 600 people there. Don't know exactly. It's hard to judge when you get to a certain size. Like it's really hard to judge how many people is that. But yeah, hallway track was great. I mean, I just always had some place to be standing and chatting, or there was a bunch of good places to sit and hang out. So like sat down with Mike Perham for a bit and then just were chatting about how things were going and all the Redis weirdness of the Redis Inc. decisions lately and whether or not that affects Sidekick's adoption and whatnot. It was fun to just pop in, say hi, hang out for a bit. Most of the trouble was there were so many conversations I wish I had with someone for like an hour, but we really needed like more than the sort of 5 or 10 or 15 minutes that we could chat.
Yeah.
So, but that's the excuse to get people on the podcast or hang out afterwards and do Zoom calls or whatever it is. Definitely hit up a lot of people to say, hey, we should catch up after the conference as well.
Yeah,
So,
totally. Yeah.
you guys were getting recognized for being in screencasts a little bit.
Yeah. Kent and I also got to do a little walking tour thanks to the Honeybadger folks.
That was great.
I was jealous. I missed that. So
Yeah.
where all did you go?
It was super fun.
I believe it was Hamtracked. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. but-
Hamtramck.
Hamtramck, thanks.
Ham
Hamtramck.
sandwich.
Yeah, so it was just a smaller town, but man, all the stories, basically a big mob connection. But I love that stuff.
Oh,
All the different types of immigrants that used to be, I guess, Irish, Italian. Now it's more Bangladesh, I think, and Yemen the last few years. But it keeps changing. But it's fascinating. And then part of the reason it's its own city within Detroit, part of the reason it stayed that way is because way back when, in the 20s or 30s, the mobsters didn't want to have to bribe 2,000 Detroit policemen, so they could only bribe 12 or something. So that's why it sort of lobbied the council people to keep it a small city, separate city, but they could still run their operations in Detroit. It was fascinating, all those stories and the speakeasies. And what was that, The Spy, that TV show? Oh, no, I forget.
Oh, the tennis guy, right?
Yeah, he's a tennis player. Then he worked in was it the OSS? The war?
OSS, yeah. Someone at the spot where when we were eating, when we were talking about that, or actually, that was a bar we stopped at when we were talking about that one. The guide was like, "Does anyone know what the OSS is?" And someone was like, "Yeah, open source." So like, but,
Anyway, Frank Kobleski. I have that name wrong too, but CIA, and then his whole life story was turned into a TV show, popular one in the 60s or 70s, and he had to keep telling people, "No, that's not me." And of course, it was him, and he was being paid royalties his whole life in the TV show. Yeah. Many stories. Yeah, just so many stories. And of course, the people were all great. Thank you, Josh and Ben, for doing that.
Yeah, I wish I got to do that. When I did make it around Detroit, the downtown was, well, I mean, we're kind of there in the middle of the week and stuff, so I didn't know how busy it would be. It felt similar to like St. Louis downtown. There's stuff going on, but not a ton. They were like setting up for a race or something downtown. They were assembling grandstands and moving barricades and all kinds of stuff. So it was cool. The GM Evil Lair headquarters building was pretty cool with the 5 towers or whatever. It was sweet.
Yeah. I'm glad I figured out how to navigate that thing pretty early on.
No, I kept going up to like the 3rd floor or something. Then it was like, actually, you need to be 1 floor down to get on the elevators or something.
It was funny. There was one point in time where all 3 of us were going back to the hotel, or we were in the building. I saw Kent. I was like, "Kent," because I knew he was going the wrong way. I was like, "Where are you going?" He's like, "Well, I see Chris over there. I'm following him." I was like, "Well, he's going the wrong way. Come with me."
It was a cool building, though. Had a whole bunch of the cars at the bottom. Never went into the GM like apparel store or whatever it was.
Oh, I didn't even do that.
Yeah. If you came in from like the riverfront side, it was like on the 2nd floor up there because they had like restaurants or whatever. But I live like 2 miles from a GM assembly plant. So it was kind of cool to go and still feel like I was at home.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Overall, though, killer conference. Loved it.
Yep.
So much fun.
Yep.
It was a step up from last year for sure. Andy and Ufuk and the whole committee and everybody that was working on it had just nailed every little bit of it. The only complaint I had was they overcorrected on, they were vegetarian forward, someone said, but it was like there's a massive line for the non-vegetarian lines at lunch because there was like 3 or 4 vegetarian lines and 1 non, and it should have done 50-50 at the most.
One lunch I thought was great. Table, it was vegan. So I skipped that one. I went to the other ones. And then because it had no line, I went, I guess I'll go over to the vegan table. And then they'd mislabeled it. So right at the front were the beef and chicken. And then it was vegan the other half. I'm like, oh, so nobody knew that. I'm like, oh, I'm loading up. It's great.
Wow.
You just take the trays and walk off.
Yeah. I ended up at the back end of the line like every single day. Even the one day I tried to get there early, by the time I got there, like apparently everybody else had the same idea that day too. And I was way at the back. I was like at the entry point to that big room where they were serving a bunch of stuff. But
I think that's why Jason Charnes will always go out to lunch, just skip the whole ordeal, or often does at least. And then I'm scarred from Rails World, watching the food being taken away while I'm stuck in conversations, trying to be polite, but also starving. So I was there 20 minutes before the line was supposed to open, but they opened it like 2 minutes after we stood. We were just like, screw it. We'll just stand here and talk for 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then they were like, okay, you guys can eat. So we got lunch early every day, and that worked very well. I was glad to do that.
I stood and talked for 20 minutes every day too, but at the back of the line, it just took that long to get up there.
Yeah. Had a good time. I'm very curious if Drew Bragg will have successfully convinced them to have RailsConf in Philly next year.
Right. He was trying hard. He was pushing.
He was trying very hard. It'll be a great little celebration. It'll be sad, but everything eventually has to change at a point. I think that was the vibe that I got off of that. Like you could risk making that announcement at the beginning of the conference and just setting a sort of depressing vibe to the conference, but everybody was excited about it in a way.
I think it helped make that conference like have the.
Well, we got to talk about it so much. Right. If you announce it at the very end, it's kind of like, what? And kind of a caught off guard, and you don't get to talk to people about it. But we had 3 days to discuss like, RailsConf and looking back on all the previous years, being excited about the last one and making it sort of a celebration of all the stuff that's happened and whatnot. I really hope that a lot of people shift and we have 600 people at RubyConf or whatever, maybe not this year or whatever, but next year or whenever RailsConf is finally ended. So I guess that would be 2026. Yeah. Be the first year that will be only RubyConf. But if you can't make it to Rails World, you need a big conference like this. Otherwise, you're kind of only able to go to a bunch of little 100-person, 200-person ones. And it's encouraging to see 600 people show up very excited for the future of Ruby and Rails. And that is needed still. There is a place for it. It's hard, but hopefully somebody was saying basically like when they're doing RailsConf, they've got to already be on the ball for RubyConf. So they don't have any breaks and they're working on that 24/7. And it's like, they didn't want to be an events company or a nonprofit just doing events. They're doing all this to support Ruby Gems and Bundler and all the amazing stuff that we get. So I was glad to spend time talking with Martin and a bunch of other people working on Ruby Gems and stuff. And it's just like, you take it for granted. They have to get funding for doing that work. Events were at one point a way to do that or an idea on how to do that. It grew a bunch. I think O'Reilly helped them at one point, but O'Reilly was really kind of geared for doing bigger conferences and stuff. And that is expensive and all that. So it becomes kind of like a hard thing where it's like, you're effectively gambling when you're doing a conference at 2,000 people and you got to book the venue 2 years in advance. And then God forbid there's a pandemic that nobody can predict. So then you're screwed financially on that. So it'll be really good, I think, for the long term of Ruby Central that they will have more of a, it's almost like going from a one-time payments product in your business to like a subscription, and you have now predictable revenue and you don't have spikes of like, well, we announced a new course and then we made 100,000 this month and $0 the next month or 1,000 or 10,000 or whatever. It's like hopefully going to help them find a way to make it more even, because the thing that everybody I think takes for granted and that I want to make sure we talk about in this podcast is like, we just take so much for granted that we can run bundle install. They're doing all this hosting, doing all this security work, which is actually kind of insane how much of a target they are. And we don't even think about it ever. It's just like, oh, this is how Ruby works. And it's like, well, no, actually it doesn't. That's all the people, but also all the infrastructure that they built and need to keep running and keep doing development. Otherwise, if they don't, then things will go down and then nobody will be able to install any gems or security. For example, if someone gets a hold of, maybe they get a hold of the Rails gem on Ruby Gems and could replace it with their own code that's got some malicious stuff in there. We don't ever look at what is really, I mean, if we're debugging, we might bundle open the code, but it's not like us as individuals are really going and saying like, is this exactly the code that was pushed up to Ruby Gems? Is that exactly the same thing as what I see in GitHub and the repository there? So I think that's the important thing for everybody to sort of take away is like, consider supporting Ruby Central and keeping this stuff going.
I was going to say, if you can get a membership, they do have a donate what you can kind of one-time thing too. So if you can't do like the recurring membership thing or whatever, you can throw them a couple bucks. I have to imagine every little bit helps. So
totally. And all the contributions are equally important as well. If you find a security thing or whatever it is, or a bug, being involved, helping them fix those things, whatever, also incredibly valuable. and supporting the conference. So grab a ticket to RailsConf or RubyConf this year. That'll come up in what is that, 6 months away? So they're going to be in Chicago. We'll have more pizza. We had some really good pizza at, what was it, Nikki's? Was the first day we went? I didn't have enough Detroit style pizza. So yesterday at Costco, we bought the Motor City pizza, whatever it was called, frozen pizza. So I'll have that for dinner one night.
Excellent.
It'll be like the conference isn't over. But
Yeah,
then
right.
we could have deep dish pizza in Chicago.
See, I need to start training for that because I need to order. What's the one you and Erica were talking about? You can order frozen from, and it's still pretty good.
Lou Malnati's. I
That's
think
it.
maybe some of the other ones you can too.
Mm.
I like theirs a lot. They have, I forget what it's called. There's some sort of like butter crust or something that you can order. I don't know if you can get that in the frozen one or if it's like their normal thing, but we will have to go there.
Yeah, Nikki's was good, really good. I like that pizza.
Did you go to Buddy's at all?
No,
Someone said Nikki's was better than Buddy's, but everybody seemed to be going to Buddy's. It
I
sounded
saw
like
it.
the
I
famous
saw that in
one.
the Slack. Yeah,
Yeah.
I tell you
We
what, that
almost
place-
went, but they were closed.
Oh, really? That place I went to Friday when I was doing my little post-conf Detroit tour, Detroit 75 Kitchen. Woo, man. That's where I had that Philly sandwich, that cheesesteak sandwich. My God. Dude, that place was awesome. That might have been the best meal I had while I was in Detroit.
Mm.
Well, now they
Wow.
have it's come from Philadelphia, so you can get Detroit style pizza in Philadelphia.
Nah,
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah. I have to have a
I was
cheesesteak
gonna
too, 'cause I
say.
did both in Detroit, so I'll have to do the same there.
We went to Drew's wedding. That was a fun story. It was like, I meet Erica and she's like, do people go to this conference just to find jobs? And typical
Sure.
conferences would be like to find a job or to go sell stuff to other people in the industry or whatever it is.
Right.
And I was like, this is very, very different than that. And I was like, I went to Drew's wedding. That's the kind of relationships you make here at RailsConf and RubyConf and stuff. That is truly the joy of going to those. Just because, yeah, it's now you show up and it's like after you've gone once or twice and you start to meet people and it's like, oh, I'm just hanging out with 600 friends this week. This is amazing. Because
Yep.
I go home and I don't know that many Ruby developers or whatever in St. Louis. There's a handful. Our meetup hasn't run for a year or so, it looks like. But I meet two people at RailsConf that are from St. Louis. One guy didn't even know I lived in St. Louis. And so he was surprised. And I was like, well, we're getting dinner or lunch next week or something. And
Yeah.
then Ted, I guess, had emailed me a while back and I forgot all about it. And we were planning to grab lunch or something and just never happened or whatever. And so we got to actually meet in Detroit. And then the three of us are going to go have dinner or something next week. But it's like, you meet the people who is it, Steven, that also lives in Montreal, Kent?
Oh yes. Well, was it Montreal or Quebec City? I can't remember.
I don't know. I don't know the difference.
Oh, dear. Somewhat close. Either visits Montreal a lot or he lives here. I forget. Yeah, Stephen Lachance. Yeah.
Yeah. So like now you meet, of course, you're not even home and run into people that live where you live. So
Oh, it was nice to see them, as Collin joked, to see the motherland every day. When we walked out, I'd see the big Canadian flag flying
that
down
was really cool.
south from Detroit.
Yeah,
That
What's that?
waterfront was beautiful.
totally. Yeah. Well, we went to Nikki's. We were with Nate and all the gang from a brand new box. right?
Yeah.
That was awesome. The whole team was great. That dinner was awesome. So thanks again to those fellas as well.
Yes. So much. Those are the people that you like leave and you're like, wow, I have new friends. Now
totally.
I need an excuse to go out to Kansas City to go hang out with them. And hopefully we'll see them at, RubyConf or whatever soon. But it's funny because you end up with these friends that start out as like, oh, I see you once a year at the conference. And then you start like just hanging out with them more often. Maybe you go to RubyConf as well, or you end up just like texting them regularly throughout the year and just become real life friends, even if you don't remotely live anywhere near each other. But it was a good time. It was definitely one of my favorites, maybe my favorite RailsConf that I've been to. It's been long enough that I've forgotten a handful of the old ones that I went to at this point, but
Yeah.
At a blast.
I'm going to say hands down my favorite for sure. So thanks again to everybody involved because I know it's a lot of work. I don't know firsthand, but I know it's a lot of work.
Well, and Ufuk and Andy don't live in the US.
Right.
So they were organizing a conference from Europe, basically. Huge thanks to them. They killed it. And the entire RailsConf team killed it. Well, gentlemen, get back to work. I don't really want to work after the conference, but it really like gets me jazzed to go build stuff again. So
Totally.
I always enjoy the fueling off of other people's energy every few months.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. I'll talk to you all later.
Cool.
All right.
Thanks for having us. See you.
Yeah. See ya.